You're now tuned into the hottest podcast in the world, the Stay Woke Podcast, right here on TheSonicBreakdown.com.
Man, it's time to wake up. Get this cake up. Only thing I care about is switching.
Welcome back to another Stay Woke Podcast. This is D. Ray Brinson, and you know the Stay Woke Podcast is presented by TheSonicBreakdown.com. So please go check out the reviews and articles that we have on TheSonicBreakdown.com. Today's topic, or this episode, is titled Not Black Emoji. These are going to be a compilation of conversations that we have that are going to be based on the video from the footnotes of Jay-Z. And in this particular episode, it's going to be based off the specific footnotes of the story of OJ. One of the things that video sparked for me was the idea of, can black people or people of color rise above racism and the oppressions that are associated with racism? And when I was watching the video, there was a section where Kendrick Lamar talks about when he first realized like he was black, that he was a black person, and it was an incident that occurred with his mom and a police officer being very disrespectful to him or to his mother, and he picked up on it even at the young age of 5. The question I want to pose to the audience here, and actually let me introduce the audience here that we have as well. We have Reddy, Constant on the podcast. We also have Brother to the Left, who's also been on several of the podcasts. And we also have Junior, who was on I think it was 2 episodes ago with college athletes getting paid. And then we have a newcomer, which is Spence. We got together because of another member of the podcast, Pendarvis Harshaw. And so I'm going to get their opinions on all this. So again, I want to pose that same question to you guys. And when did you first identify yourself as black? Or do you even identify yourself as black?
This is Brother to the Left. My perspective on when I identified myself as black is going to resonate with some, most definitely not with all. But my experience with that wasn't a quintessential moment. There wasn't one time or one moment where I considered or identified myself as black. Rather just a bunch of experiences, growing up where I realized, hey, I'm being treated just a little different than everybody else. Just let me give my background really quick. And, as we talk about how and when I identified myself as black. Early on, I don't know if you know much about the Bay Area for those viewers out there, but I started off in Fremont, kindergarten in Fremont. Boom. You're surrounded by white people, talking about 3rd, 4th grade, San Leandro, San Lorenzo. Those 2 cities are real interchangeable. I went to Edendale, San Lorenzo. Then you talk about 7th, 8th grade, boom, East Oakland. It's on and cranking. East Oakland. All black, all hyphy at the time, all, with it. So, as you talk about my progression through each one of those cities from 7th, and 8th grade on, really from kindergarten on, you're talking about a bunch of different experiences. But especially early on in kindergarten in Fremont, I recognized that I was being treated a little different. Even in kindergarten, as far back as your consciousness goes, because most of us can't remember school, can't remember adolescence or your childhood, under 4th grade, or under 4 years old. You mostly remember kindergarten on, as a teacher, that's just what development says. You remember kindergarten on. Some of us remember preschool, but for the most part, you remember kindergarten on. And so here's the thing. I wanted to give the context here for what I'm about to say, right? Because for me, and I feel like for most, there wasn't a pivotal moment of when I realized I was a black man. More like a consortium of, of moments in which I realized I was being treated differently. Standards were set differently for me than for others. When it came to, what you could achieve academically or what you're expected to do socially, things were a little different for me than others.
And Brother to the Left, I have to completely agree with you. This is your boy Reddy. For me, it wasn't one moment. I grew up in a neighborhood that was predominantly white and Latino. And me and my brothers were the only, not jokingly, not kind of, the only black kids in the whole entire school. So when I started getting that understanding that I was black, it wasn't like Monday I realized I was black. It was me slowly seeing that I didn't look like the rest of the people around me, as well as they would give you these like kind of clues that you were different, that you were the one that was that on the outskirts of who we are. So for me, it was like growing up in 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade where everyone's like, yo, you're darker than the rest of us. And as you know, I'm a mixed kid, just to let y'all know out there. I'm not that dark, but I was still darker than everybody around me. So I was already like, yo, you must be something that we're not. So even before the kids knew, you know, they were Mexican or they were white or had that concept, they knew that I didn't look like them and I didn't behave like them. And my mom, my brothers, we all looked and acted at least a little bit different. So for me, it was a compilation of years of experience when you really get that. I can't say an aha moment because it's kind of like you always knew you were different. And then you kind of, I know I'm black, but I don't really get what that means until the point where you're like, yo, I truly get the concept of, you know, being black still in high school.
How y'all doing? It's Spence. I'd say for me, it wasn't kind of similar to Brother to the Left. It wasn't necessarily one pivotal moment, but I was fortunate enough to have parents, particularly my mother, who were very big on understanding black identity and promoting that and celebrating that. So an example of that was when I was in elementary school, she made it a point that we would celebrate Kwanzaa or understand the meanings of Kwanzaa. That was one thing we would just do in our house. It wasn't, you know, kind of a big thing outside of my school or anything like that. And the neighborhood that I grew up in, I'm from the East Coast. It was multicultural. The neighborhood that I was in specifically, or on my street, it was mostly black, but there was also, particularly in my neighborhood, Puerto Rican. We had plenty of people all over South America, Asia, it was very much multicultural. So I grew up kind of seeing everyone or having experiences with kind of different cultures from everywhere. So I was used to seeing different faces. It wasn't weird to do that or anything. Even when I got to a school that was, say, more predominantly white or vice versa, it didn't faze me as much until I started having experiences where it was a negative impact. I think for most black men, when we talk about black identity and when did you realize you're black, it's usually when something negative happens to you. Someone calls you a nigger or something that would tell you that you're other, you're not accepted. So I didn't necessarily have that experience until I got to middle school, but I was already aware of my black identity maybe in, I'd say, in elementary school, just based off the fact that, you know, my parents are very big, particularly my mother, very big on kind of promoting that and understanding that and championing that, putting me around other people that could teach that in terms of understanding like Martin Luther King Day, why he was so important for civil rights, having parents that went through that and to give context to that and understand why it's important. That really kind of began to shape my life in terms of, okay, you know, I understand that, you know, we all have differences. How do I fit into this? What puzzle piece am I? How do I fit into this larger frame of life? So kind of going through that, everyone kind of has, or at least with me, I felt like there was a wake up call at some point where it's like, okay, you know, there's advantages to this and in a larger context, disadvantages, particularly how you deal with other people or how they see you. And, if you grow up in a predominantly, say, black neighborhood, you won't necessarily have that until you go into another experience where someone's treating you different. And when you have that, it's very telling depending on your, how you were raised, how you're going to react to that different stigma or that, you know, having a different stimulus basically. So understanding that and kind of going through it begins to shape how you see other people. So if you have a negative experience very early on, you can have a bad perception of, say, white people or whoever else is around you that would put something bad into your head. So I think that shapes a lot of how we view our identity, at least growing up. And it changes as we get older with more experiences.
What about you, Junior?
This is Junior. Me personally, I can remember two moments. The first one being, I must have been 4th grade, and I too was in Fremont for a lot of my adolescence, and I waved to a police officer. I was with my dad in the car or something, and my dad was like, "We don't wave to police officers. We don't say what's up to police officers." And as a 4 or 5 year old, all you get from that is we have to behave differently for some reason. And I don't know how long it took me to exactly understand why I had to behave differently. I'm around police officers. But from that age on, I knew that we had to behave differently in certain situations. And then the second moment, and this kind of plays into my background as an athlete and kind of how I like to frame things in athletics. That's kind of where I come from. Is I must have been in the 4th grade and I was playing Little League Baseball and I was easily the best player on the team. And we were losing some game and the coach wouldn't let me pitch. Coach wouldn't let me pitch. And they was hitting balls out the ballpark, doubles, singles, walks. And he was letting all these other kids that didn't look like me come up and pitch. And I remember being in the outfield, pissed off. And then I finally realized this is because of the way I look and we're about to lose this game. And as an athlete, I was first just mad we're about to lose. And I think then I realized it's because of the way I look. And I don't think it's any coincidence that about a year later, I was done with baseball and I kind of stuck to the basketball thing. I mean, I think those two moments, especially the second one, because it had to do with sports, which was, you know, kind of my safe haven, and that plays into what you saw in the footnotes about athletes kind of getting that pass. I think that was so potent in my memory because that was so contrary to what I had experienced so far.
And, you know, so all of us have shared something, you know, about our own personal experience. But, you know, I think I want to share something that you know, I could be wrong, but I truly feel that this is something that is the experience of every black man in America. There comes a point when you leave childhood to where you start to look like a man, right? It happens different for each one of us, right? Whether you're 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. But when you start to look like a man, when you start to look like a young adult, when you start to look like a black man, when things start to change for you, you start getting followed around in stores. Police look at you different. Women treat you different, for sure, right? Women treat you different. And you start, you know, there's a totally different reaction from your society than when you look like a little boy. There's a certain threat from the majority of society. There's a certain love from a certain aspect of society, you know, particularly when we talk about women, right? That was very apparent to me at about 12, 13, 14 years old. I realized that when I went out into the world, people were interacting with me different than when I was 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, as opposed to when I was 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, when I started to look like a young adult.
I want to touch on that again, brother to the left, is for me, I guess my experience is different. I noticed, similar to Kendrick, around 5, that I was a black man, or a black person, because of course I wasn't a man. One of it, or some of it, has to do with the fact that my grandmother was very big on educating us, similar to what Spence was talking about of African American history. Those are the first actual books. I can remember my grandmother sitting me down and bringing out this big ass blue book with black letters on the front, and it was before the Mayflower. And so that kind of, at that point, solidified in my mind, I'm black, and this is like, there's a lot of bad things that happen to us. But then she would also point out the things like, she'd be like, you know, your uncle, he was a Tuskegee Airman. And she would say all the great positive things about the Tuskegee Airmen to give me that sense of, you know, positive identity of, yeah, we did go through some things, a lot of horrible things that it's unfathomable to even think about, to be honest with you. But she also pointed out, like I said, the positive aspects of us as a people. So I understood that. So that was one experience. Also, around the same time, I had another experience in the negative, and that was this girl was picking on this girl was picking on my brother, and I stood up for him, and you know, didn't do anything, but it was basically like, yo, leave him alone. So she got her brother, and me and him got in a fight, and what started the fight was his first words were, "If you fuck with my sister, nigga, I'm gonna kick your ass," something to that extent. But nigga was in there, and I was like, I already knew what it meant because, again, of all the information that my grandmother was giving me, but I didn't understand. You really don't understand it. Like brother to the left was saying, you get a better understanding. The same thing as Spence was saying, as the older you grow and you understand those little things. But I already knew at that point that it was negative, and that's not something that should be said to me. So.
And a lot of it for me growing up, and we had a lot of beautiful, strong black women in my family specifically, was picking up on the ways they defended us. And something goes on at school or on your team or in a grocery store. And as a kid, you don't necessarily realize right away what's going on, but then you hear the way they're defending you. And then that's when I really started to pick up on exactly why some of those situations were going down, because of those moments of being defended by some of those strong black people in my life.
Just to pick up on that was something both of you guys just said that resonated with me. One of the things my mother used to tell me all the time, particularly when we would go out any place, whether it was especially in stores, keep your hands out of your pockets. Keep your hands out of your pockets. She would just constantly just ring that into my head. Keep your hands out of your pockets. Keep your hands out of your pockets. And as a child, that's not something you necessarily think about all the time because, you know, you're walking around, you're doing things. It's not the first thing.
You're in your own little world.
You're in your own little
world.
world.
You don't even realize that that's a thing.
you, as a child, you would not, at least I didn't understand the context for why she would say that as much as, she would say, keep your hands in your pockets. You don't want people to think you're stealing. And I know I'm not planning to steal anything. I don't know why someone else would think that. I have no intention of doing that. I'm just coming into the store with, usually with my parents or whoever. That's not what I'm going to do. But having experiences of shopkeepers and other people follow you around the store and starting to get confused as a child. Why is he following me? I don't understand this. I'm just enjoying shopping, whatever. That was something that started to pick up as a child. I would realize that another way of being treated differently. And that comes across as a microaggression. It's not someone coming up to you and say, hey, I don't want you in my store because you're black. It's, well, I'm going to question if you can afford whatever products you're bringing up to the front of the register. I'm going to question whether you have something extra in your bag that you may not be paying for in the register. And wondering to myself why you would even question that, as opposed to the other customers that are in the store as well. I don't know what, strikes you about me that would pull me out on having these experiences and having to have a parent or someone else teach you. Well, the reason why I do it is because they see you differently. And then asking why are you seeing me differently?
And real quick, I just want to say, to follow that is, I'm glad that you brought that up, because on previous podcasts with the bear, and that's a conversation that I brought up because he's from, Indian culture, where I asked him, I was like, are these the conversations that you're having that you had as a child, or that, and he was like, no. And I was like, these are the experiences that I've had, and other people that I've known have these same experiences because of how we're viewed. And so, go ahead, brother to the left. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I wanted to add that in, though.
You essentially, you touched on exactly what I wanted to say, which is that, and I'll take it a step further, or take it back a little bit. When you talk about white privilege, right? When you talk about white privilege, you're talking about a set of experiences, negative experiences, that you don't have to experience because of this color of your skin.
I know where you're going. That's going to come up later.
Okay.
So hold that thought. We are definitely going to go back to that, a little bit later.
Okay.
But I wanted to kind of change the tone a little bit and I want to bring up some examples of other people of color that haven't quite had that experience where they identify themselves as black, or that they feel like, ashamed of it in essence. And some of the examples that I did want to bring up is, O.J. Simpson, of course. The title of this podcast is I'm Not Black, I'm O.J. for a reason. So I wanted to just get your opinion on just that line. What does that feeling, what does that line evoke to you, as all of us are here as black men?
I'm not black, I'm O.J.
That he somehow transcended being black.
That comes from his personal experience, right? Which is a real and valid experience. But it comes from experience of being young and being really athletically adept, right? From a really early age. And because of that athletic ability, you're being treated differently your whole life. And so because of that, you're in a situation where those around you are not treating you like the average black man. They're not looking at you as the criminal or the hypersexual individual or the individual that is up to no good, which is the connotations that comes with being a black man. They're looking at you as the shit because you can catch a ball and run a ball, right? So because of that, you're in a situation where you're missing all of those negative connotations. So when OJ says, I'm not black, I'm OJ, that comes from a perspective of not experiencing the black man experience that most of us feel here in America.
I think that's celebrity privilege, to touch on that. That's something that is only afforded with success and is associated with success. You're able to get away with more things. You're able to have new experiences. You're able to have more opportunities. You're able to go into new spaces because you have that success. You are that celebrity. You have that athletic ability. And when you have that, people will champion around that. And in some cases, in most cases, they not necessarily will forget your ethnicity, but they will look at, again, as brother to the left said, they'll kind of look past that as I've heard this term before as like, you're one of the good ones, or you are separate from the rest of the people around you. And because of that, you are an exceptional person, and you will be treated exceptionally until you stop being successful. You stop, if it's athletic, you stop running as fast, you stop catching that ball, you stop scoring as much. And when you lose that value to them as they see, through your celebrity, then you lose a lot of you lose that privilege that has been afforded to you. And when that comes, you're basically back in the pile with everyone else. You're another crab in the barrel, essentially.
Yeah. And again, just bringing the athlete's perspective back into it. Yeah. Exception, I think, is a perfect word. And I think that's a travesty in and of itself, is that they need to be regarded as the exception, whether it's you're an athlete who does well in school, or you're the exception that is smart as well. As if there is another smart, capable young man all around the world, as if there is another athletically gifted young man who just didn't have the same opportunities that this specific athlete was afforded that got him to that point. And you're totally right. Twitter does a perfect job of exemplifying what happens when you're not putting those points up, or you're not as fast or not as strong. Twitter will turn on you in literally minutes, and they'll talk about anything from your mom to your kids with no remorse. But then it can switch right back, and you get that key back if you have a big game. And it's easy to kind of get disillusioned by that exception as the exception, if that makes sense. And get caught up in being an exception and believing you're an exception. And I think OJ's comment to me more than anything was irresponsible, and irresponsible in the sense that he should have said, I am OJ and I am black.
Two more figures that I think kind of help illustrate the points that you both are making, as well as you two, brother to the left, is Tiger Woods and Sammy Sosa. And it kind of encompasses, I think, several different of the layers. One of the layers that we just talked about with OJ. Another one is, or kind of similar, is the same thing with Tiger Woods, who is of mixed race, of mixed heritage, but wanted to separate himself from being black, of being identified as black. And if we go back to just, I think it's Plessy versus Ferguson, basically that whole idea of the one drop rule, that if you have one drop of black blood in you, you're considered black in the eyes of the world and the government and society. But yet he still wanted to separate himself from that, as well as another, Sammy Sosa, who went even to the far extremes of bleaching his skin and he even said on the interview that he did it because he wanted the preferential treatment that he saw his counterparts that were either light-skinned or white receiving on the same field as him. Because even in that, he was, quote unquote, one of the exceptions. He was, a household name, Sammy Sosa, Mark McGwire at that time, the home run kings. But he still felt, even with that he was still less because of the color of his skin. So I wanted to get your opinions on that. Go ahead.
Absolutely. That plays into the inferiority complex. And in many cases, I believe even in OJ's case, it's a defense mechanism. If you're an exception to the rule and you're receiving these privileges, you're receiving these opportunities, why would you want to go back from that? And if you can put yourself in a space where you can receive all these things, then in many cases you can shed what other people don't have the affordability to do. You can shed your blackness. And even when OJ saying that, I don't necessarily fault him for that, because that's literally been his experience. That's been his experience his whole life. That's been experience he's lived with. If he's grown up being an exception, then anything else other than that is unacceptable. And if you see blackness as unacceptable, then you're going to shed that off. You're going to push that to the side. You're not going to associate with that and bring that along with you as you become more successful, or not make that a cornerstone in how you move around the world. And if you see things particularly around that, like it's an inferiority complex, or you recognize that your blackness or your skin color is in some cases leaving you to have disadvantages and things like that, then they just see that I feel like when you're successful, in many cases, if there's a way to separate yourself from that or push away from that, whether it's bleaching your skin, denouncing your blackness, or, kind of pushing that to the side, or really playing on the idea that you're mixed and not black, then they're going to do that to continue with the lifestyle that they've been leading and being in the same world that they've been in. Anything past that is going to be unacceptable for them.
Tiger Woods' example is so interesting because he's in the world of golf, which is easily the whitest sport and is not a rich man's sport, but a wealthy man's sport. And he was being championed as perhaps the greatest ever, obviously one of the most famous athletes to ever exist on the earth. And so I can only imagine, I'm speaking to Spencer's point, to him, what kind of pressure that must have felt to conform to what that world is supposed to be. And if you go look at golf, they're kind of the poster child for getting institutional preferential treatment so that world can continue to exist and continue to make money and continue to keep African Americans and other minorities out of it. But here you have Tiger Woods being held up at the top of it. And then just to see for like you said, for him to make his mistakes and to see the way everybody abandoned him and to see how hard it's been for him to come back. I think that just goes to show how much pressure being in such a, like I said, a white sport and a wealthy sport as a black man who has that inferiority complex. It just shows you the toll that could take on a man's brain.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just to piggyback on, what has been said so far, this takes me back to something I said about, 6-7 months ago when we did the Kaepernick podcast, when he first started sitting down and kneeling, right? And one thing I said was, it's about goddamn time, right? For professional athletes to start standing up and voicing issues that are, and things that are happening to the common man, right? Or the common black man anyways. And, I think what we're talking about, what we're speaking here now is that there are professional athletes that are either oblivious or just simply missing the experiences of the average black man because they are athletes, because they're getting paid millions, because they're being worshipped as heroes, right? But just think if 10% of them started sticking up and standing up for, what the average black man experiences. Imagine the impact that would have on our culture and on our society. Because as Americans, right, even if you're a white man in Alabama, in the deep South, in Mississippi, you are worshiping these NFL teams. If you're a white man in Boston, right, you are worshiping the Celtics, which is a team that is predominantly black, right? These are your superheroes, whether you're a white man or that white man's son. You are worshiping these athletes. But what they don't remember, what they don't recognize, what they're sometimes purposely oblivious to, and sometimes what they're just ignorant to is the experiences that these black men would face if they were not athletes. And so that's why I gotta put Kaepernick on a pedestal, right? That's why I gotta, give bruh his dues. And that's why I gotta talk shit about every other professional athlete that ain't doing shit. Because if they did not have that athletic ability, they would be treated just like everybody else. Yet, because they're making their millions, because they've had this experience that is separate from the average black man, they're being treated like royalty. However, if they did not have that athletic ability, they would be treated just like every other black man, and they would want themselves to speak up for the average black man, yet they're not.
And that same pressure, that Brother to the Left is speaking about, is almost the same reason why they don't speak up, and particularly because of finances and how much they are beholden to the same people that are affording them these opportunities. Expressing your blackness, expressing an opinion about racial and social justice issues, if that's not on the same wavelength as your corporate sponsors or the people that are signing your checks with your name on it, then they can essentially take that away from you and say, hey, we don't want you to talk about it. They essentially control your conversation. It's like, we don't want you to speak on that. Watch what we do to you, and watch how quickly the conversation will change around you. You may have been the hero now, but we can easily snap our fingers and turn you into a pariah. We can always dig something up on you. We can always just flip it, so that's been a big problem and a constant back and forth that I've seen with plenty of athletes that have already been ostracized for one thing or another, whether it's Mike Vick or other people that have been in issues, been arrested, have gone through kind of public shaming and all these things. And then to come back and see someone else that's, standing up for these rights, who's essentially unafraid of dealing with the quote unquote financial consequences of speaking up around these social issues. They're going to come back and go, okay, I lost what I had and who I was providing for. So now I'm going to switch my perspective and say, hey, brother, I see what you're doing. I don't think that's the right way. You need to be quiet, because if you keep speaking up, this is the pitfall. Look what happened to me. And we see that time and time again. There's plenty of athletes that have spoken against Kaepernick for the same reason, despite it being a silent protest, despite all these other things that, as most people say when it comes to protests, why are they so loud, or why choose this platform, or why do it this way? They usually question the medium for how athletes choose to express themselves. You have Kaepernick. Other people say, look, I'm not worried about the money. Or I'm not worried necessarily about these consequences you ostracizing me, because I want to be on the right side of history. I want to stick to my values or what's true to me. And if I see things that are wrong and I have a platform that I can speak on, then I'm going to use that. And essentially, the same way that Kaepernick has been essentially blackballed from the NFL, you've seen such a huge outcry and outpouring around him and support around him. There have been marches in New York, there's all over the country, just in support of what he's doing, because other people realize what he's standing for and what he's trying to push. And of course, it's not everyone has their agenda and so on and so forth. But with Kaepernick, they can at least understand that he's coming from a positive place, wanting to bring awareness and wanting to end the injustice. Really, I can't really understand why it would be a problem. You have someone who's standing here trying to end injustice, and you're getting upset about the way he does it because it's disrupting your football game, when the reality is the people that are paying for that don't even want to have this conversation to begin with. And they're, in many cases, are actively working in many ways to, disenfranchise, a lot of these players. So that comes across many times when it's like, okay, we don't want you to hurt our brand by speaking on these social issues, or, coming out and being so loud, or quote unquote too black, or any of these things that don't fit the mainstream agenda. You're not sticking to the script. So that's going to keep coming across, and until you have more athletes that come up and say these things.
And just to piggyback on what Spence was saying, I think a perfect example is an irresponsible comments that Ray Lewis made. And I think he's a perfect example because, as many people know, he was on trial for murder, came back, had a really good rest of his NFL career, won a Super Bowl. Now he's all over people's TV screens, getting to give his opinions on certain things. And as much as, Black America has spoken out against what he said, it's none compared to, in his mind, the damage that would have been done to his pocketbooks and his brand. And also that's kind of a issue of Black America not mobilizing their buying power well. And that's kind of what allows them to have so much control over our black men and what they can say and can't say and can support and can't support.
That's a perfect segue into the next section of what I wanted to bring in, and come back next Friday to hear the conclusion of this Stay Woke podcast episode. Not Black, I'm OJ. Definitely come back and take a listen for that. We drop a new episode every Friday, so subscribe on Apple Podcast or our YouTube channel, The Sonic Breakdown, or follow us on SoundCloud. And you know our motto: live, listen to some great music, and above all, love more. We out.